welcome back everyone for another video. This one is gonna be a bit long, so please bear with me for that. Hi everyone. So today I will be discussing with you what is epistaxis. So epistaxis is a topic in AN. So epistaxis is a very important topic. So I will be trying to cover it in one video. It is basically bleeding from inside the nose, which presents as an emergency seen in all and it is seen in all age groups. Now bleeding from inside the nose. Now there are two places that we should know. One is Little's area, which is also called the Kisselbach's plexus. It is in the anterior part of the nose, while there is Woodruff's plexus, which is found in the posterior part. So this is anterior. This thing is the Woodruff's plexus is posterior, right? So in children, there is a habit of nose picking, and any trauma basically can lead to bleeding from this Little's area. Now, the etiology of the causes basically include your local causes. Now, the local causes would include something that is related to your nose and is not systemic. So, that will include unilateral choanal atresia. Now, acquired, there is infective causes in acquired, which include acute. This will include viral rhinitis. Now, nasal diphtheria is bacterial rhinitis and acute bacterial and other acute bacterial and fungal infections. Now, in chronic infections, we will have specific infections like tuberculosis or TB, syphilis, and leprosy. In non-specific, we will have a xena, which is basically nothing but atrophic rhinitis. Now, atrophic rhinitis is again a type of rhinitis, which in which basically your turbinates are your bony prominences in your lateral wall of the nose. So basically, your turbinates become shriveled and thinned out. Now, so these were infective causes due to some bacterial, fungal, parasitic agents. Now, the inflammatory causes, the inflammation of the nose and the sinuses together is called rhinosinusitis. Rhinosinusitis. Now, sinuses are very closely linked to the nasal mucosa. That is why any problem with the nose, be it rhinitis, be it anything else, also is accompanied by sinusitis. So now the causes for that can be allergic or vasomotor. Now, vasomotor is psychological basically, and nasal polyposis, that is nasal polyps. Polyps are nothing but benign outgrowths which can be sessile or pedunculated. So, nasal polyposis is one. Then another cause is rhinosinusitis, which can be allergic or vasomotor. Now, another cause is trauma. Basically, any trauma that is iatrogenic. Iatrogenic is through violent sneezing or hard blowing or fingernail. When a person has a habit of picking nose, a fingernail can lead to the damage to the blood vessels because they are very superficial in the mucosa. So now another trauma case could be facial trauma. Now what happens is any blow to the nose can damage your plexus. So they can be damaged mostly, and then there is fracture of the middle one third of face or the base of skull. So in RTs, high velocity accidents, when there is middle third, that is your nose area or and your zygomatic bones are fractured, then also it can lead to epistaxis. Now, small children have a habit of taking things up their mouths, up their noses. So, any foreign body stuck, so any body that foreign body that is stuck can also lead to basically your bleeding because it will cause friction and damage to the blood vessels. Now, it can be living, like in case of maggots and leeches. Now, maggots are mainly seen in poor socioeconomic classes. Now, non-living can include a rhinolith. Rhinolith is nothing but a stone, basically. So, if you have a stone, if you have a neglected foreign body, so now if a child puts something up their nose and it is small and it is not taken care of, a child complains and but it is not taken care of, then it can lead to a neglected foreign body. Now, DNS can lead to epistaxis, which mainly epistaxis is seen in spur kind of DNS because it is sharp and pointed. Spurs are what? They are like this, right? So the part where they will be touching, that will be damaged, and this will cause bleeding from that area. Now, intranasal surgery. So now after surgery, we do packing, we do cauterization during surgery. But after that also, the damage could be so extensive. It could be such an extensive damage that we will not be able to control it, and it will lead to massive hemorrhages from the nose. Now, the atmospheric changes, because due to pressure changes, there are a lot of stress on the blood vessels, and they tear and lead to bleeding from the nose related to. Now, we these were all your local causes. Now we will be dealing with the causes related to the nasopharynx. That is your so adenoiditis, that is inflammation of the adenoids. And tonsils are found in our Bell's ring. So adenoids form the uppermost part of the Bell's ring, and that adenoids can get inflamed. So that is called your adenoiditis. Now juvenile angiofibroma. So basically that's a tumor of the blood vessels. Now juvenile angiofibroma, JAF also we can call it, is the most common reason for your adolescent bleed. Now, idiopathic unknown causes, they can be neoplasms. So that benign could be, it could be transitional papilloma, it could be angiofibroma. Malignant tumors include lymphoma, olfactory neuroblastoma, squamous cell carcinoma, adenocarcinoma, adenocystic carcinoma. Then it also includes melanoma. So you can remember in case of malignant lymphoma, squamous cell carcinoma, adenocarcinoma, and melanoma, because we all remember these easy tumors. And now drug induced, it is also called rhinitis medicamentosa. So if you continue using some medicines like nasal decongestants or cocaine for a longer time, that can lead to inflammation of the nasal mucosa. Now, in case of inhalants, it includes tobacco, cannabis. So if you're inhaling a lot of smoke, basically, then it can irritate and lead to the bleeding. Now the general causes, general are basically your systemic causes that we would be discussing, so that affect not only just the nose but also they also affect your body as a whole. So now the first disorder we have here are the bleeding disorders. And then got coagulopathies, that is, so coagulopathies is nothing but there is coagulation factor deficiency. The main factors which are deficient are factor 7, factor 9, and vitamin K. Now, platelet disorders, they include thrombocytopenia and platelet dysfunction, basically. So, they can also lead to bleeds. Now, blood vessel disorders include aplastic anemia, leukemia, hemophilia, and scurvy. Now, vitamin C deficiency, that is scurvy. So, that also leads to bleeding disorders. Now, hyperfibrinolysis. Let's break this word down. Big hyper means more. Fibrino is fibrin. Lysis is breakdown. So when there is breakdown of fibrin at a very high rate, that is called hyperfibrinolysis. So even if there is a small bleed, it can become a major issue in this case. Now, liver disease. Now we can have liver diseases, serious disease, kidney disease. Now in kidney disease we have chronic nephritis. Now there is erythropoietin, which is secreted by the kidney, that is basically needed for your formation of blood and its elements, and that is why if there is any kidney disease, there can be deficiency of erythropoietin, and hence there can be any bleeding disorders as well. Now in CVS you have hypertension, which is a major cause of bleeding in adult. Hypertension is basically what increased BP, right? So if there is increased BP, there is increased pressure on the wall. The blood vessels can burst and lead to a major bleed. Arteriosclerosis is weakening of the vessel wall. Now, liver cirrhosis is an important factor because liver is responsible for the manufacture of various coagulation factors. Now we have neoplasm. We have mediastinal malignancies, because they will increase the pressure within your mediastinum, and when your pressure within your mediastinum increases, the pressure on your neck also increases, because if you see, this is our entire body. This is a mediastinum. This is our abdo. This is our HNF, head, neck, and face. Right? Okay. So what happens is, if there is any increase in pressure over here, then there will be an increased pressure over here, because somewhere that pressure needs to dissipate, right? And if there is continuous pressure on the And if there is any continuous pressure on the mediastinum, that can lead to bursting of the vessels as well. Idiopathic, there is no known cause or pathology over here. That includes sarcoidosis. Sarcoidosis is basically your, so idiopathic means cause is not known or why does it occur. So one syndrome is Wegener's. The second one is sarcoidosis, in which there is a abnormal collection of inflammatory cells, and in any inflammatory disease, right? So drugs like salicylates, analgesics, anticoagulants also have a role in epistaxis. Now, general infections like influenza, chickenpox also can cause measles, typhoid can also cause basically bleeding from the nose, the vicarious menstruation. Now that is this is an important term. Now basically your vicarious menstruation is that when that what happens in women is sometimes that they're menstruating and there is bleeding from the nose as well. So there are, or in other terms, there is epistaxis as even if once the epistaxis occurred at the time of menstruation, that will be called as vicarious. It is not that it has to occur repeatedly, then only it will be vicarious menstruation. Okay. So now the third thing that is important after the causes is the sites from where there can be a bleed. As I told you, there are two main plexuses, that is your Kisselbach's plexus or there is your Woodruff's plexus. Now Kisselbach's is your also called your Little's area because it was described by a scientist named Little, nothing more so with it. And Woodruff's plexus is and so Little's area is anterior while Woodruff's plexus is posterior, right? So now I say that a Little's area is just for children doesn't mean that only children will have bleeding in Little's area, even adults can have, because now Little's area is basically in 90% cases Little's area is the major area of bleed, and basically both these plexuses are an area of anastomosis, right? So it is also called as Kisselbach's plexus. It is a cause of anterior epistaxis. Basically, so if there is any injury to the sphenopalatine artery, then it can lead to massive bleeds because it is the main artery which will carry blood to the nose. That is why it is also called as the artery of epistaxis. Now, anterior ethmoidal artery, it is a branch of ophthalmic artery. So anterior ethmoidal will form your Kisselbach's plexus, but posterior ethmoidal does not form any anastomosis because it is short and remains at its place only. So only anterior ethmoidal will form your Kisselbach's plexus. Now the other two arteries are septal branch of your superior labial artery and terminal branch of the greater palatine. Now, the question is, you may ask that why do maximum bleeds occur here? Why is it? Because it is anteriorly located, first of all, and it is very superficial. That is, it is very much exposed to the environment. It is basically exposed to drying effects of respiratory current. So there is drying in the nasal mucosa. There can be fingernail trauma. It is also if there is any fingernail trauma leading to epistaxis, it is also called epistaxis digitoria. So it is in the most common in children. Why? Because due to the habit of nose picking. Hypertension also, it can the most common cause is hypertension in adults and nose picking in children. Now, because it is anterior, so it will get damaged more than Woodruff's. That is why it is the most commonest site that can have. Now, your Woodruff's area is the cause of posterior epistaxis. Basically, it is in the nasopharyngeal area. It is located behind at the posterior end of the inferior turbinate. It is formed by the anastomosis of your sphenopalatine artery and your posterior pharyngeal arteries. The origin of this plexus is posterior pharyngeal wall. The other sites of epistaxis includes retrocolumellar, which is basically arising from your columella, goes vertically down behind the columella, crosses the floor, and joins the venous plexus on the lateral wall. And if you have a venous bleed, then the most common would be the retrocolumellar off. So the most commonest cause of and epistaxis is bleeding from your Little's area. Now Little's area is formed by anterior ethmoidal, the septal branch of the sphenopalatine, and septal branch of the superior labial, and terminal branch of the greater palatine arteries. Now, this is the most common. Now, the most common etiology in children is nose picking, and in adults it is hypertension, which can lead to bleeding. Now, Woodruff's area is a site of posterior uh, epistaxis. It is formed by the sphenopalatine and posterior pharyngeal um, arteries, right? And it is the most common cause of the posterior bleed. Now, a retrocolumnar vein is basically your vein which will join the venous plexus on the lateral wall, and it is the most commonest site for venous bleeding, and it occurs mostly in young people. Now, so arterial bleeding is of long two characteristics. It is occurs in old age mostly because of hypertension, and the duration is long because the blood is fast flowing, so it will fastly come out of the nose as well. Now, in case of venous bleeding, it occurs mostly in case of young people and occurs shortly. Now we come upon to other sites. Now the other site is basically your ethmoidal vessels, where they are the sole cause of bleeding. Now that occurs when the bleed is from above the middle turbinate and the corresponding area of septum. So if there is any bleed occurring above the middle turbinate, we will see that it occurs due to ethmoidal vessels. Now if it is below the middle turbinate, there would be the branch of sphenopalatine. So if there is any bleed from the posterior cavity, it will directly fall into the pharynx. Okay. Now we come upon to another terminology, that is what is diffuse bleeding. Diffuse bleeding would mean that there is bleeding from both your septum also and from your nasal wall also. So this basically occurs in your systemic diseases and blood dyscrasias or disorders. Now we have classification on what basis are the two things is epistaxis classified. As I already told you that it can be anterior or it can be posterior. So anterior is that, so how will we tell that whether it is anterior or whether it is posterior? If the patient is sitting and the blood is flowing continuously from the nose, you can see the blood coming out of the nose, then it is anterior. But when will you say it is posterior? When the when you do not notice any blood coming out from the nose, but the patient is throws up a coffee colored vomitus, then you will say that there is a posterior bleed, right? So now, to diagnose a case, to manage a case, first we should now know what all things do we need to know. We should know the duration. From when is it occurring? Then we should know the mode of onset, whether it was spontaneous, that is, it started suddenly, or was some trauma to the nose. Like if not here, there can be an epistaxis. If there was fingernail trauma that started a huge epistaxis. Nature of bleed, right? We should ask the patient that, we should also notice one thing, that it is fresh blood that is coming out, or the blood is in the clotted blood, that is clots are formed and they are coming out, and or there is any blood stained discharge. So fresh blood means that there is active epistaxis. Clotted would mean that there was a previous bleed that clotted and that came out. Now the amount of blood loss, now on the basis of amount of blood loss, we can triage a patient. Like if we have two, three patients, one is having a mild bleed, okay, fine. Another person is having moderate, and the third person is now having a severe bleed. That is, the blood is not stopping only. Uh, then you triage the patient and you give the most importance to a person who is having severe bleeding, right? Now, which side of the nose is it coming from, left or right? Because it is important to know to treat the for treatment aggravating whether there was a hard blow, there was trauma, or there was sneezing that was done. Now, whether there are any relieving factors, like was there anything given or taken by the patient himself, like rest and medication, right? Bleeding is of so we should also try and judge. So sometimes in most cases we can identify whether it is anterior or posterior bleed, but sometimes it just does not happen. We cannot identify. So in that case, we give general measures of treatment, which will be discussed later. So if there is any medical ailment like hypertension or there is any genetic disorder like Wegener's syndrome, like or nephritis. So there is any history of drug intake. So now if a person is a chronic drug abuser, like if he's taking cocaine or any other such drug that can lead to epistaxis, so we will treat him accordingly. So if a person had been using chronically nasal drops, that can also right. So whether there was any alcohol taken or not, there was any bleeding disorders, there were any previous episodes or not, or there was any trauma to the face or not. Now there are certain differences that we should know between anterior bleed and posterior bleed. That how will we know that whether it is anterior or posterior? So now we should always remember that mostly the bleeding from nose is anterior. That is, it will always come from the front. But some because the damage to the anterior area can occur more frequently as compared to the posterior area. Right? So this most common site is in anterior area is basically what? I've already told this, it is Little's area, right? So in anterior and in the case of posterior part, it is the posterior or superior part of the nasal cavity, basically a Woodruff's plexus. So we can say that in posterior part there. So now it is anterior bleed is more common in adults, young adults or children, and posterior in people of more than 40 years. Why people of more than 40 years? Because trauma is very difficult to the backside of your nose, to the midruffs. But then we can have hypertension as a cause, which can cause posterior bleeds. Now, if anterior is a mild bleed, we can easily control it, clot it easily. But your posterior bleeds are very severe in nature and require hospitalization. So now, in case of management, we will have your general measures. We will that include basically a sitting posture. We will ask the patient to sit down, and we will first make sure that there is only one bleed. That is either it is only anterior or it is only posterior. So if there is anterior bleeding, a lot of blood is coming out of the nose, then we have to make sure that there is no posterior bleed as well. And then we will, if there is excessive, now to ascertain whether there is any posterior bleed or not, how will we come to know that? If there is any blood loss through spitting is occurring or any vomitus that is coming out, then we can also say that if there is any repeated swallowing movements that are occurring, we can say we will reassure the patient. Mild sedation will be given. We will keep a check on the vitals we have to keep on checking regularly, because if they start falling, then we have, it means there is, if anteriorly not a lot of blood is coming but our vitals are going down, then we will suspect that some other site of bleeding is there and there is massive hemorrhage taking place. Now, if there is massive hemorrhage, we need to maintain our hemodynamic stability through blood transfusion or blood product transfusion. Now, we will give antibiotics. Basically, now in specific management, we do nasal packing, that is through gauze pieces. So, we are inserting a foreign object and blood is coming in contact with that. So, to prevent any bacterial or any other such infections, we will give antibiotics, and that too in majorly in case if the packs have to be kept for more than 24 hours. Now we give oxygen to the patient. We have to put the patient on continuous oxygen because we will be doing packing. Now, one golden rule that we all have to do is that packing has to be bilateral. It is never unilateral. So that is why we will give up oxygen, because a person cannot breathe now normally. Then we will treat for any underlying cause, like if there is hypertension or any other disease. Now, when you see the first aid, now what things you can do when you first see a patient who is bleeding. First of all, you will pinch the nose, that because, and that has to be for at least a minute, because that will keep pressure on it was on the little area, and it can basically stop the bleed. Now, one rule that we should remember for any bleed is that we always keep pressure on the bleed so that it stops, because now the blood is basically, when you put pressure on a artery or vein, whichever is whatever is bleeding, what happens is you're putting pressure, you're not letting the blood come out. So what is happening? The blood is basically pooling over the site of injury. Now if the blood is pooling over the side, now if the blood is pooling over the site of the injury, then what literally happens is that the your coagulation pathway kicks in system that okay, blood is pooling, we need to fix that thing. Now, the second maneuver that we do is your Trotter's method. Basically, that is done rarely, but and it's done in case of hypertensive epistaxis. When a person is having hypertension and that is leading to your epistaxis, what we do is we will ask the patient to lean forward over a basin and spit out any blood. The person to breathe normally through the mouth. We do not ask the patient to breathe through the nose because your air currents are dry and they will lead to a further aggravation of the situation. Now, we also advise the patient that against forceful cleaning of the nose, then this will lead to dislodging of the clot. So they will travel as emboli all throughout your body and lead to even more complications. So we can also give ice packs to the patient because that will lead to stasis of blood and vasoconstriction. Now, other management methods are basically cauterization. Cauterization is nothing but burning of the blood vessels through electricity. So it could be silver 15% silver nitrate, 50% trichloroacetic acid, or it could be endoscopic or electrocautery, that is using electricity, so that the area heals off and the bleeding stops. Now, what is endoscopic cauterization? Basically, it is done under anesthesia, and we use an endoscope to localize the cause of the bleed. And the instruments that we use are your malleable unipolar suction cautery or bipolar cautery instruments, and there is less morbidity and hospital stay uh, through endoscopy because endoscopic procedures are always very minor procedures. They do not require large incisions and surgeries. But what is the limitations? However good a procedure is, it always has certain limitations. However good with this is, but this is an invasive procedure. We can say that it can lead. We've seen that it can lead to further damage. So if there is massive bleeds, this is not used because there would be pooling of the blood somewhere and will not be able to clearly visualize that, right? And it also requires anesthesia, so if local anesthesia per se, but still there can be harmful effects of anesthesia as well. Now we do anterior nasal packing. So what is anterior nasal packing? So basically we will insert gauze pieces anteriorly into the nose. What are the indications for this? There is profuse bleed which is difficult to localize, so cauterization cannot be done. Endoscopy is not indicated in profuse bleeds, right? So what we use, the material which is used is your ribbon gauze soaked in liquid paraffin is used. Then how do we say, how do we know that what length of the gauze we need to use? So for each nasal cavity, the length is the same, that is 1 meters. The width in adults and children is different. The width would be 2.5 centimeter in adults and children would be 12 millimeters. Now the procedure includes we will clear the nose of clots. First few centimeters of the clots are folded upon itself, then they're inserted along the floor. So what this means is if this is your nasal cavity, this is basically your vestibule, so this will be your floor. So the nasal gauze piece would be inserted along the floor. Then now see, there can be this type of layering, that is basically your horizontal layering. Like this is not equal, they go equally, right? So if this is your nasal cavity, they can either go like this. This is basically your horizontal layers which are formed. That is your horizontal packing, and another end also comes out like this. And the other one can be basically a vertical packing. That is, they will go like this. They'll start folding it and they go like this. This is your vertical packing basically. So now the two ends are kept outside. So because see, these packs are not forever, right? That this is not a permanent procedure that we'll do. So these need to be taken out. Now, since we are inserting it in a body cavity, we need some guidance to remove it as well. So we keep two ends of the gauze pieces out so that we can be easily pulled out. Now we will remove it mostly after 24 hours if the bleeding has stopped. And we also need to give antibiotics with these because the antibiotics are very important. Why are they important? Because we are inserting a foreign body. Now this, however sterilized we do, but there is always a chance of infection. So we need to prevent those further systemic infections. So we will give a course of antibiotics. And basically, what infections can occur? Sinus infections or toxic shock syndrome. Now, the posterior nasal packing, the indication is basically if the patient is bleeding posteriorly into the nose, that is one of the major ones. Then, or if the bleeding is continues even after anterior nasal packing. So, what happened? We did this we did either this or the horizontal packing, but then also the person is vomiting out blood. Then we suspect that there is can be a posterior nasal bleed as well. So in that case, we what we will do is so what happens is we will tie three silk threads to a gauze piece. After doing that, what we will do is we will insert a catheter through the nose that will basically come out through the mouth. Now through this, we will pass the rubber gauze with the silk thread and withdraw the catheter. Now after withdrawing the catheter, we have threads are there. So as providing that as a guide, we'll be inserting your nasal packs. So this will lead to anterior packing as well as posterior packing. Now, so the two threads have to come out through the nostrils. They are coming out. The third thread, which was there, the third one, number two, number three, is short and it will hang in oropharynx. Now, so this will permit easy removal. So now we come up onto the Foley's catheter, which is used. Now Foley's catheter is basically the size which is used is 12 to 14 F. Now it is used in posterior packing instead of if there is no nasal packs available, but a Foley's catheter is available. We will use it for posterior packing. We will insert it through the mouth and then inflate the balloon with the help of 5 to 10% 10 ml of normal saline. Then it is pulled forward basically forward and choana is blocked, putting pressure. Now the epistaxis balloon, it has two valves, posterior nasals and outer nasal. So one is for posterior nasal space and the other one is for outer nasal cavity. If the bleeding is continuous, we can do SMR, which will lead to elevation of mucoperichondral flap, and this will lead to fibrosis and constriction of blood vessels and stopping up of your bleeds. Now, SMR can also remove spurs, which are also can be a cause of. Spurs are nothing but pointed out projections of your. Now, the last option that remains is ligation of vessels. At what levels will we ligate the vessels? Now, the ligation can be done at the level of external carotid. It can be above the origin of superior thyroid artery, and it is done with the help of a curved incision, right? And where it is done, the main area is bifurcation of common carotid, but it is avoided because external carotid ligation is rarely preferred nowadays because it can lead to embolization and more peripheral branches like a sphenopalatine can be ligated. Now your maxillary artery, if there is uncontrollable bleed, we will ligate the maxillary artery. Now, the approach in case of maxillary artery is called a Caldwell-Look operation. What happens in this is posterior wall of the maxillary sinus is removed. It is blocked by applying clips. Now, in case of anterior-superior bleeds above the middle turbinate, we have ethmoidal arteries or vessels. Now, if they are bleeding profusely, we can ligate both anterior and posterior will be exposed on the medial wall of the orbit. So we will approach. So if this is our eye, this is our nose. So we will this is our medial side of the orbit. So through here we will approach your middle turbinate. Now another surgery is TESPAL. Another surgery that we can do is your TESPAL, which is nothing but a transnasal endoscopic sphenopalatine artery ligation. So, as I told you, sphenopalatine artery is the major blood supply branch. So, to control bleeding from that, we can do a TESPAL procedure. Now, the instrument which is needed is a rigid endoscope that does not bend a lot. And it is done under anesthesia procedure. Now, what is the procedure? So a mucosal flap is lifted in posterior part of lateral nasal wall. That is, in the posterior part of the nasal wall, the lateral part of the nasal wall, there is a flap which is raised. SPA, that is your sphenopalatine artery, is localized, and the distal branches are cauterized and the flap is reposited. So to with the sphenopalatine, sometimes it becomes necessary to even ligate the anterior ethmoidal artery through Lynch incision. Basically, this becomes important. So in order to achieve higher success rates. Now, embolization is basically nothing but interventional radiology procedure. Now, through femoral artery, we will catheterize and we will try and stop the bleeding through ligature of the maxillary artery. So, the instruments we need are absorbable gel, polyvinyl alcohols, or coils. Now, embolization we can either do on the same side or we can do on both the sides, because now since nostrils are very close, so they can share some blood vessels, and one blood vessel can go from here from right to left and vice versa. That is why we need to do it on both sides as well. Now the risks are basically thromboembolisms and local hematomas. Now ethmoidal arteries can't be embolized. Now, another term that we should know over here is hereditary hemorrhagic telangiectasia. It is basically occurs in the anterior part of the nasal septum. The cause of recurrent bleeding. Now, if a person is continuously bleeding again and again and again, we should consider this also in a differential. Now, to treat this, we need argon or NdYAG laser, right? And we need to repeat it over several times because telangiectasia has a tendency to transfer. That is, if it was an anterior ethmoidal, it can occur again in some other vessel, right, of the surrounding mucosa. Cases may also require a septodermoplasty, that is a and the anterior part of septal mucosa is excised and it is replaced by a split skin graft. Hereditary hemorrhagic telangiectasia is also known as Osler-Weber-Rendau disease or syndrome. It is autosomal dominant disease. Basically, there is AV malformations. AV means arteriovenous malformations which occur. Commonly affected sites are nose, lungs, brain, and liver. So basically, they enlarge over time and they have a tendency to rupture and bleed. One of the most common features is spontaneous and unprovoked nosebleeds on a recurrent basis. So that is it for this video, guys. I was not able to upload for some time, but I hope you guys are doing great. Take care of yourselves. Thank you. Bye bye.